Hey everyone, today I'm going to be covering the elm-antd project and just providing a sort of like overview of the structure and how things work. It is going to be a two-part video, so part one is going to cover everything except the showcase, and then part two is going to be dedicated entirely to the showcase. So if you want to learn a bit about how the ant library itself is structured, then watch part one. But if you just want to learn a bit more about the showcase itself and how that works, watch part two. And if you have any feedback, I would really appreciate any comments or anything like that. But yeah, if I open uh, the project structure here or show the folder structure, I can walk through all the different directories. So Circle CI is just the um, CI/CD setup stuff, so something folks shouldn't really be too concerned about unless they're trying to make changes to the CI/CD pipelines. Some Git stuff, GitHub stuff, so there's just random ad hoc files there. For those who don't know, Elm, when you're building a project out, the Elm compiler will generate the extras folder. So there's a whole bunch of metadata in there that's not really relevant to us as developers. Oh, actually, never mind. I got confused with the Elm stuff folder. So the Elm stuff folder is the metadata information. So this folder contains information that we don't really need to concern ourselves about. The elm-antd extras folder contains, right now, not much. It's literally just 22 lines of code right now. But I'm starting to realize that we're going to need to use this a bit more over time. And what it is sort of just like add-ons or extras to the elm-antd project. So I could demonstrate that right now, although it's in a pretty rough form. But I don't know if you can see this in the video. Maybe if I can zoom in a bit. When I click on these buttons, there's a nice little animation that happens, and that animation is enabled by JavaScript. So doing it in Elm was just going to be a little bit too, I don't know, imposing, I suppose. And so I felt that using JavaScript for these extra things that aren't really central to the behavior of these components, yeah, it should just be done in JavaScript. So there's actually another thing that I recently implemented that's going to probably need JavaScript. Let me see if I can find it. So the checkbox right now doesn't have any animations, and that doesn't really adhere, 100% to the ant spec. And so yeah, there's going to be some JavaScript involved in order to actually attain 100% feature parity. Okay, so moving on. Scripts, this is some more CI/CD stuff, except this file actually. So oftentimes, if you're developing in this project, you'll want to format the files. So you would simply just do this. Oh, and that would take care of formatting files that are both in the ant directory, so the actual sort of ant project, but also the showcase, which is this project. So you can see there's a distinction there in the folder hierarchy. Okay, so moving on. Whoops. Okay, so I'm gonna actually talk about the showcase last because it's such a huge project, and I think it might be useful to actually discuss how it works for folks who aren't familiar with sort of like Elm apps, like multi-page or multi-route Elm applications. So I'll cover that in the end. So the source is simply the different components. So if I head over to the elmlang package for ant design, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's why. Cool. So yeah, if we look here, you can see that there's like sort of resemblance between the layout or what's being shown here and what we're seeing here on the folder hierarchy. It also let me see, maps over to what's being exposed here. Oh, that's interesting. Let me open it on the full window here. Yeah, so this list of exposed modules maps exactly over to what we're seeing here. So the elm-json determines, so here this file at the root of the project determines what is the usable API of this package. Okay, so let me see. Is there anything I want to cover here? I guess yeah. One thing I want to cover with respect to the actual elm-antd project is that um, this library is themable. So if I go over to, I think this is actually the best example. Let me enable this. So there's this nice little color box that when you initially load the web page, by default it has the actual the actual ant theme. So I'm using the official colors, but if I click on this little color thing, I can dynamically change the primary color. And it's pretty cool because I'm not only changing the primary color, but I'm also changing all the different sort of like variations of the primary color that are needed to create sort of like the hover color, border colors. You can see that the animation itself is also adhering to the new color that I just applied, and it goes across all the different components. So if I go to alert, that theme has already been applied. For alert, the primary color or the theme color only applies to the info alert box. The success, warning, and error boxes do not change. That was intentional. But yeah, like it's a pretty cool little feature of elm-antd. And if you were to see here in the code examples, maybe I can just open that up here. There we go. Oh man, I gotta fix this. Keep opening files where my directory structure is. This is it. Other component. There we go. So you'll see that there's no reference to theme. And I'm pretty hyped up about that. So the way that the theming works is that I don't define the theme on a per component basis. It's defined based on a global CSS file. So if I go, actually, it's not in Showcase. So if I go here, you'll see that there's a CSS module. And that's where the magic happens, basically. So there's two functions that are exposed. There's a create theme styles function and a default styles function. That simply, so if I go to the definition here, you can see, let me just scroll up a bit. You can see that I'm simply calling create theme styles. So default styles is just a wrapper around create theme styles with a default theme. And in the future, this will have a ton of configuration, I think, or I hope. But for now, it's only the theme only sort of like handles the primary color. But anyways, in order to actually use elm-antd in your projects, I believe I mentioned this here. Yeah. So you have to call one of these two functions. So you have to call, again, create theme styles or default styles. So here in this example, I'm just calling the simple one. Because otherwise, if you don't call this at the top of your Elm project, your components are not going to be styled. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, as a developer or as someone that might want to contribute or understand how this all works, just keep in mind that this project, the way components are styled or will be styled, because right now there's only 4 that are styled this way. In the future, I think all of them are going to be styled using this pattern so that you can theme them. Okay. Is there anything else I want to cover? I guess the other thing, which is kind of ugly right now, is there's a shared sort of module for classes, and it's just namespaces for all the classes, because the downside of having a global CSS file is you potentially collide with other classes that might exist in someone's project. So I tried to make them as sort of unique as possible to this package, and hopefully they won't ever collide with someone else's code or whatever. So just keep that in mind. And then the other thing too that's nice about this is that I can reference these class names both in the actual styles. So for example, if I go to checkbox, you can see I'm importing these styles here, and then I'm referencing them in all sorts of places. But then if I go to the actual checkbox implementation, you'll see that being referenced here too. Okay, so that's the overview of the ant package. For the rest of the video, I think, well, and there's also tests, but there's not really much going on here. As this project gets bigger, I'm gonna start emphasizing writing more tests, and I'm gonna myself invest more time in this. But right now, I just wanted to set up the scaffolding for it and show an example. If anyone wants to contribute and wants to add a test, they know how, and it's all there for them. So the showcase project or folder. Yeah, so let's let's get through this. So the Cypress folder is being used for visual testing. So I use this service called Percy. Actually, maybe I can pull up a PR that demonstrates the usage of Cypress and Percy. So I have a bunch of CI checks and PRs. Maybe it's a bit excessive, but it's kind of nice. You'll see that there's this Percy elm-antd CI check that is always failing because it needs manual approval. So if I click it, it's going to take me to Percy. Hopefully I don't have to log in. Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second to log in. Just going to pull up my credentials. Why can't I log in? Okay, I'm logged in. So let's try that again. I'm going to click on the Percy link, and it's going to take me to this UI where, as a reviewer, I get to see a diff of all the different components. It's really weird because, like, for example, here there's a diff here that's demonstrating some changes between what was added here in this PR and master. But this is just a dependency change, so I don't understand why there would be a visual diff here. So generally speaking, I just approve these PRs without much consideration. The project is still like in its infancy, so I don't worry too much about this stuff, but I wanted to set up the scaffolding of all this stuff so that it's set up for success in the future. So I'm just going to approve this, and I'll worry about this later. But yeah, so basically I use Cypress to do these visual diffs with this Percy tool as well. So Percy and Cypress are working together. Let's see if we can look at a spec here. So this is an actual visual test that I have for buttons. Is there anything else besides that? Yeah, no. So yeah, I'm just using I'm using Cypress's testing um, library or system or framework to simply render a component to the DOM and then stream a uh, I want to say it's an actual representation of the DOM. I don't think it's an image. Um, I kind of forget, to be honest. But yeah, so I'm calling Percy here to stream the HTML, CSS, and JS of what was just rendered. So here I'm rendering a component or a button component and then streaming it to Percy, and then that's where the approval stuff comes in. Okay, skipping all that stuff. Let's see. So this is what's built with Webpack, Elm stuff. We know what Elm stuff is already. File server. Okay, so file server. There's some historical context, but basically all you need to know, is that these files or these example source code files are being sent or being stored initially on some backend um, in memory, and when you go to a particular page, for example, if I go to like the tooltip page, the second you land on this page, this Elm front end is gonna do an HTTP request and fetch the source code for this component, and the server is going to respond with this basically. Or in a more complex example, the front end would say, "Hey, give me all the examples for a button," and then the back end would respond back with all the examples with this. There's a bit more involved because I do caching both on the front end and on the back end. But basically that's the whole like idea. So yeah, the file server takes care of doing the fetching. And when you're developing locally, we fetch from the file system. And when you're running, in quote unquote production, we're fetching from GitHub based on a Git hash. So yeah, that's what that is, if you were ever wondering. Tests, there's some tests for some stuff in the showcase. But this is the meat and potatoes. So one thing you should know is that the showcase project has two modes basically, and yeah, so there's this like idea of a visual testing mode, and I think it would be best if I just demonstrate that, and also if I go to the package JSON for the showcase. So here you can see that there's this dev command, which is very typical of a JavaScript project. So I just run Webpack dev server, and then Webpack will take care of compiling the Elm files, and then I have a nice server to run on port 3000. But when I'm running visual tests, I need a server to serve HTML and CSS and JS. And I wanted to, or actually, if I go back to these Percy examples, and I go to here, you may have noticed that the components are being rendered perfectly centered on the screen with nothing else. So it's just literally one component, and then I do a diff against that. And so the way I do that is that I have this idea of like a visual testing application. And so what I'm doing is I'm compiling the project in production mode. So here you can see I'm compiling it in production mode with Webpack, but there's this visual testing mode. And then I serve the static assets that were just built on port 3000. So let's try that out actually. What's the command? So let me just copy this. All right. What happened? Okay, let's try that again after installing. There we go. So we're going to build the project, and now it's available on localhost 3000. So let me copy that. Boom, there we go. So I can also render different components if I want to. Component, let's do dashed button or simple input. There we go. So this UI is a function of the URL. And if I don't specify a particular component, it just renders one by default. And the title will say, oh, the default component was rendered. So that's how I can tell if like invalid input was rendered, or sorry, invalid input was applied to the URL. So if I do like component doesn't exist, I should see default. Yeah, so that's how I can sort of what's it called, like compare the URL and the UI and see, oh, like did this component that I expected to be rendered, was that rendered? So anyways, what else? Let's go back here.